The door exploded open. Vanessa burst through without knocking. Her expensive suit wrinkled from aggressive movement, papers clutched in her white-knuckled fist. The heavy oak door crashed against the wall with a bang that rattled the windows overlooking the Phoenix skyline. It was a sound of pure, unrestrained fury. A sound that had no place in the calm, measured world I had built. I looked up from my quarterly reports, my reading glasses sliding down my nose as I took in my daughter's flushed face and the storm brewing in her eyes. 30 years I'd occupied this office and never had anyone, not even the most hostile competitor, entered with such blatant disrespect. This wasn't a visit, it was an invasion. Mom, enough. Vanessa slammed a thick stack of legal documents onto my mahogany desk, papers scattered across the polished surface, covering the financial projections I'd been carefully reviewing. The sound was a second explosion, a deliberate act of violation in the quiet sanctuary of my workspace. "You're too old for this," she spat, her voice tight with a rage I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. "And you can't handle it anymore." I removed my glasses slowly, setting them down on the blotter with deliberate care. My hands were steady, a stark contrast to the tremor in hers. Decades of difficult negotiations had taught me the value of measured movements, of maintaining a calm exterior when a storm was raging inside. None of those deals, however, had ever involved my own daughter standing before me like an adversary, a stranger in a familiar suit. "What exactly can't I handle, Vanessa?" My voice remained level, a feat of control that cost me more than she would ever know. The storm wasn't just in her eyes, it was brewing in my own chest, a cold, painful tempest. "If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from, or what time it is for you." She began pacing behind the chair across from my desk, a caged animal in a tailored suit. Her hands, no longer clutching papers, were clenched into tight fists at her sides. "The company," she said, gesturing wildly around the room, at the very walls that represented my life's work. "It needs fresh leadership, modern thinking. You're stuck in the past, Mom," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "While our competitors are racing ahead with digital innovation and aggressive expansion, you're still running this place like it's 1995. Fresh leadership." The words stung more than any business loss ever could have. They were a direct assault, not on my business acumen, but on my very identity. I stood up slowly, deliberately, my full height still impressive despite my 68 years. I let the silence hang in the air, a counterweight to her frantic energy. "And you believe you're ready to provide that leadership?" I asked, my voice still quiet, but now laced with an edge of steel. "I know I am." Vanessa stopped pacing and leaned forward, pressing her palms flat against my desk, invading my space. The family photo of her graduating from college trembled under the pressure. The smiling young woman in the picture, a ghost of the snarling stranger before me. "I've been ready for years. You just refuse to see it because you can't let go." The late afternoon sunlight streaming through my office blinds cast harsh shadows across her face, making her look older, harder, and deeply unfamiliar. When had my ambitious girl become this demanding stranger? I kept my voice level, though the anger was building like pressure behind a dam. "Yesterday, you wanted to take out massive unsecured loans for completely untested technology. Last month, you suggested we fire half our workforce to boost short-term profits for the shareholders." I walked around the desk until I stood directly in front of her, forcing her to meet my gaze. "That's not leadership, Vanessa, that's recklessness." Her jaw tightened. "That's called adapting to survive, while you're protecting every employee like their family. Our competitors are streamlining operations and maximizing returns." She jabbed a finger toward the scattered papers. "We could triple our revenue in 2 years if you'd just step aside, and destroy everything I've built in the process." I finished for her, my voice low and dangerous. "Everything we've built," she corrected, her voice rising again. "I've worked here for 15 years, Mom. I know this business inside and out. The only thing holding Thompson Manufacturing back is your stubborn refusal to embrace change." The accusation hung in the air between us like smoke, thick and suffocating. I studied my daughter's face, searching for any trace of the eager teenager who used to organize my tools in the garage, asking endless questions about every nut, bolt, and process. That girl had admired my work ethic, my philosophy of steady, sustainable growth. This woman saw them as obstacles to be bulldozed. "I'm not ready to retire, Vanessa," I said, the words feeling like a final line drawn in the sand. "The company needs a leader who understands the 21st century." Her fist crashed down on my desk, making the brass nameplate jump. "I'm not asking permission anymore, Mom. I'm telling you how this is going to work." The office fell silent. The distant hum of traffic 20 floors below was the only sound. In that quiet, I felt something fundamental shift in my chest, a cold, final recognition of what this confrontation truly meant. This wasn't a discussion about business strategy. This was a declaration of war. "Is that a threat?" I asked. Vanessa straightened her blazer and smoothed her skirt, composing herself with a visible effort that was more chilling than her rage. "It's a reality check," she said, her voice now devoid of emotion. "You can make this transition graceful, or I can make it happen another way. But it's going to happen." She turned and walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the brass handle. "Think about it, Mom. Think about what's best for everyone." The door slammed behind her, the force rattling the window frames once more. I stood alone in the wreckage of my office, staring at the scattered legal documents that had started it all. My hands, finally free from their duty of composure, began to shake. But 20-minute drive through Phoenix's quiet suburbs gave me far too much time to think. Vanessa's words echoed in the confines of the car, a relentless, punishing loop. "You're too old for this. I'm not asking permission anymore." By the time I pulled into my driveway in Scottsdale, those phrases had worn deep grooves in my mind, like a broken record playing a song of betrayal. Inside, the house felt unusually quiet, cavernous and empty after the raw confrontation in the office. There was no television chatter, no phone calls, just the steady, rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting down the seconds of a life that had suddenly been thrown into chaos. I hung my coat in the front closet with mechanical precision, my movements careful and controlled, a desperate attempt to impose order on a world that had just been shattered. I went straight to the bar cart in my study and poured 2 fingers of whiskey, noting how my hands trembled slightly as I lifted the heavy crystal decanter. Settling into my worn leather armchair, I found myself surrounded by the ghosts of a happier time, by decades of family memories captured in silver frames, wedding photos, vacation snapshots, Vanessa's high school graduation picture where she wore that proud, brilliant smile. It was the same smile I'd seen when she was a girl, helping me in the garage, eager to learn every aspect of the business she now wanted to rip from my hands. When did everything change? My gaze drifted to the old company photos arranged on the bookshelf. There we were in 1995, me standing in front of our tiny rented office space, Vanessa beside me with grease on her hands from helping move equipment. She'd been 22 then, fresh out of college, but willing to start from the very bottom, learning the ropes, with a hunger that had made me so proud. I remembered those early sacrifices, the long nights and 80-hour weeks, missing family dinners because a client needed immediate attention, taking financial risks that kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, consumed by the fear of losing everything I had promised my family. From a garage startup with $20,000 in annual revenue to a corporation with 300 employees and $20 million, every single milestone had been earned through careful planning, relationship building, and steady, methodical growth, not the reckless/and-burn tactics Vanessa now favored. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I made it all look too easy for her. Vanessa had never experienced the raw uncertainty of those early years. She'd joined the company when success was already established, when the paychecks were guaranteed and expansion felt inevitable. She'd inherited the confidence without ever having to earn the wisdom that comes only from failure and struggle. She had my ambition, but she didn't understand the cost. But was I being fair? The question circled in my mind like a vulture, picking at every decision I'd made in the past 5 years. Was I holding on to control because the company truly needed my guidance, or because I simply couldn't imagine my own identity without it? The lines had become so blurred, I could no longer tell. The silence in the study became oppressive. I needed to hear a voice that wasn't my own, a voice of reason. I reached for my phone and dialed Patricia Wilson's number. She'd been my business mentor for 3 decades. A friend who'd witnessed both my greatest successes and my most painful mistakes. If anyone could offer an objective perspective on this family crisis, it was Patricia. She answered on the second ring. "Evelyn." Her familiar voice carried a warmth that was a balm to my frayed nerves. "Everything all right? You don't usually call this late." "Vanessa and I had a confrontation today," I said, the words coming out more tired than I intended. "She wants immediate control of the company." I summarized the scene in my office, trying to keep my tone neutral. to report the facts without revealing how deeply Vanessa's words had shaken me. Patricia was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. I could almost picture her adjusting her glasses, considering every angle. Family business transitions are never simple, Evelyn. They're the messiest part of the game. She thinks I'm an anchor holding the company back, I admitted, swirling the whiskey in my glass. The amber liquid caught the lamplight, a small, beautiful thing, in a world that had suddenly turned ugly. And how do you feel about her readiness? Patricia asked, her question cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Honestly, I think she's skilled, but she's dangerously impatient. She wants to transform everything overnight without understanding the risks involved. I took a sip of the whiskey, but maybe I'm just an old woman, afraid of change. You've always been protective of your people and your principles, Evelyn, Patricia said gently. That's not a weakness. It's the foundation of your success. But you have to acknowledge that Vanessa's generation approaches business differently. Her words were a comfort, but they offered no solution. The real question, Patricia continued, is whether her methods can preserve what you've built while adapting to modern challenges, or if they'll burn the whole thing to the ground. We talked for another 20 minutes, exploring scenarios and possibilities. Patricia shared stories of other family businesses she'd observed, some with successful transitions, others that had ended in permanent, heartbreaking damage. By the end of our conversation, I felt validated in my concerns, but no closer to an answer. I was still alone, standing on the edge of a precipice. After hanging up with Patricia, I stared at my phone, a deep sense of isolation settling over me. Patricia was a friend, a mentor, but this was about family. This was blood. On impulse, I scrolled through my contacts and found my brother's name, Richard, 2 years my senior. He had always been the pragmatic one, the one who saw things in black and white. He picked up with a sigh. Evelyn, it's late. Is everything okay? I need to talk to you, Richard. It's about Vanessa. I explained the confrontation, the demands, the threat hanging in the air. I laid it all out, expecting shock, maybe some brotherly outrage on my behalf. What I got was a cold, tired silence. Well, what did you expect? He said finally, his tone clipped and devoid of sympathy. You're 68, Evelyn. You can't run that company forever. Maybe it's time you listen to your daughter. I was stunned. Listen to her. She threatened me, Rich. She wants to dismantle everything I've spent my life building. Oh, don't be so dramatic, he scoffed. She's ambitious. She's your daughter. You taught her to be that way. You're just being stubborn because you can't stand the idea of not being in charge anymore. Your pride is getting in the way. Her words were like daggers, each one finding a soft, unprotected place. He wasn't just disagreeing with me. He was invalidating my entire reality, painting me as a prideful old fool. This isn't about pride, I insisted, my voice rising despite my best efforts to control it. This is about protecting the legacy, the employees, the family name. The family would be better off if you retired gracefully, instead of fighting her tooth and nail, he shot back. Think about the damage you could do by starting a war with your own daughter. Let it go, Evelyn, for everyone's sake. The line went dead. He had hung up on me. I stood in the silent study, the phone still pressed to my ear, a dial tone buzzing in the void. The betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just Vanessa anymore. The sense of isolation was no longer a feeling. It was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was completely and utterly alone. I arrived at the office early the next morning, needing the quiet solitude to restore some semblance of order before the business day began. By 8:15, I'd reorganized my desk, clearing away the scattered papers from yesterday's chaotic confrontation. The morning sunlight slanted through my windows at a different angle, softer and more hopeful than the harsh afternoon glare that had illuminated Vanessa's angry face. A gentle knock interrupted my email review. The door opened slowly and Vanessa entered. She was carrying a silver service tray with 2 steaming coffee cups and a plate of fresh pastries from the bakery near her house. My favorite one. Her posture was subdued, almost apologetic, a stark, shocking contrast to yesterday's aggressive stance. Mom, I brought coffee. She set the tray carefully on the corner of my desk, avoiding my eyes. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I was completely out of line. The rich, comforting aroma of fresh coffee filled the office as Vanessa arranged the cups with deliberate, almost rehearsed care. I watched her closely, a lifetime of negotiation making me analyze every gesture, every flicker of her eyes, searching for signs of genuine remorse or calculated manipulation. I spent all night thinking about what you said, Vanessa continued, finally meeting my gaze. Her eyes looked tired but clear. You're right about patience, about wisdom. I've been so focused on growth and opportunities that I forgot to appreciate what you've already built. She sat down in the chair across from my desk instead of looming over it, her body language now respectful and deferential. I remembered something you told me when I was 16. Organizing your tools in the garage, she said, a small, nostalgic smile playing on her lips. You told me that real success comes from understanding every single component before you try to improve the machine. The specific memory felt familiar, wrapped in the warm haze of countless mother-daughter conversations over the years. Her reference to our shared past, to a time of learning and mutual respect, touched something deep in my chest. It was a direct appeal to the maternal pride that had driven my sacrifices for 3 decades. I accepted the coffee cup she offered. It was my preferred roast, a rich blend from the small shop she'd discovered during her college years. The gesture was thoughtful, personal. You've given this considerable thought, I said, my voice cautious but willing to be convinced. More than I should have needed to. Vanessa sipped her own coffee, her demeanor calm and reflective. I want to earn your trust, Mom, not demand it. If you're willing to work with me on a gradual transition plan, I promise I'll prove that I can honor everything Thompson Manufacturing represents. We spent the next hour discussing specific projects and responsibilities. Vanessa asked thoughtful, intelligent questions about client relationships and manufacturing processes, showing a genuine interest in the very details she'd dismissed as outdated methodology just 24 hours earlier. She nodded enthusiastically when I outlined my vision for sustainable growth over the next few years. I understand now, she said, reviewing the notes she'd taken. Patience isn't the same as stagnation. Your approach builds lasting foundations instead of temporary profits. The coffee tasted rich and warming, with hints of chocolate and caramel that reminded me of successful morning meetings from years past. Her transformation seemed almost too perfect, a complete 180 from the rage-filled woman of yesterday, but I wanted so desperately to believe it was real. The alternative was too painful to contemplate. There's a project with Wilson Industries that would be perfect for you to lead, I said, feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in a day. It involves the kind of innovative thinking you've always championed, but within established frameworks that protect our core values. Vanessa's eyes lit up with what appeared to be genuine excitement. I'd be honored to take that on. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for trusting me. As our meeting concluded, she gathered the empty coffee cups and the pastry plate, promising to earn the company rather than simply inherit it. Her humility seemed authentic. I watched her leave my office, carrying the silver tray with the same careful attention she'd shown throughout our entire conversation. A slightly bitter aftertaste from the coffee lingered on my tongue, but I dismissed it. It was probably just the difference between our office brewing and a professional preparation. For now, I allowed myself to feel the warm glow of hope. Maybe we could still find our way back. 5:45 arrived with the same punctuality I'd maintained for 30 years. I saved the quarterly projection spreadsheet and reached for my coat, which was hanging on the brass hook behind my office door. Standing triggered the first wave, a sudden, violent dizziness that sent the room spinning. I grabbed for the edge of my desk to steady myself, my hand knocking a stack of papers to the hardwood floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't normal fatigue. This was something else entirely. The room tilted alarmingly, like stepping off a carousel that was still moving too quickly. I pressed my palm against the cool, solid wood of the desk, waiting for my equilibrium to return, for the world to stop swaying. The steady hum of the building's air conditioning seemed to amplify, competing with an unexpected high-pitched ringing in my ears. Nausea followed the dizziness, rolling through my stomach in slow, persistent waves that threatened to overwhelm me. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I loosened my scarf and unbuttoned my collar, suddenly desperate for air. Despite the office's comfortable, climate-controlled temperature, my hands trembled as I reached for the water bottle beside my computer monitor. What is happening to me? I attempted to stand up straight again, but my legs felt disconnected from my intentions, like unstrung puppets. The familiar, beautiful view of the Phoenix skyline through my windows wavered like a heat mirage on a summer highway. A strange metallic taste coated my tongue, sharp and unpleasant. This wasn't stress. This wasn't overwork. Something was genuinely terrifyingly wrong. My fingers fumbled with the intercom button on my desk phone, requiring 2 attempts before my shaking hand could press it firmly. My secretary's voice was a lifeline. "Helen, could you please call me a taxi? I'm not feeling well enough to drive." Somehow, I managed to gather my briefcase. The walk to the elevator was a slow, careful shuffle. Each step was a deliberate act of will. In the taxi, I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. I could think clearly enough to give the driver my address and handle the payment, but my body felt like it belonged to a stranger. As we pulled away from Thompson Manufacturing's parking garage, I studied the familiar downtown Phoenix skyline in the rearview mirror. 30 years of building that company, of pouring my soul into its foundation, and now my own body was betraying me. The timing was a cruel irony, coming just as Vanessa and I had supposedly found a path to peace. The taxi driver glanced at me in his rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. "You all right back there, ma'am?" "Fine, thank you," I lied, gripping the door handle for stability as we turned onto the highway. The late afternoon sunlight felt too bright, too harsh, forcing me to close my eyes against the glare. The driver helped me up the front steps to my house, accepting a generous tip for his patience. Inside, the familiar comfort of my own space provided a small measure of psychological relief. Even as my body continued its silent, violent rebellion, I forced myself to eat a light dinner, chicken soup from a can, and a few saltine crackers, the kind of bland, inoffensive meal reserved for actual illness. Sitting in my living room armchair, I felt marginally better. The intense nausea had subsided to occasional waves rather than a constant churning sea, and my hands had finally stopped their persistent trembling. An early bedtime, that's what I needed. Sleep would solve this. Tomorrow, I'd be back to normal. By 10:30. I was under the covers in my familiar bedroom, seeking the restorative sleep that had always been my faithful ally. The digital clock's red numbers provided the only light in the darkness as I settled into my usual position, willing my body to rest. 11:45. I was jolted awake. The nausea had returned with a vengeance, with compound interest. It was accompanied by a pounding headache that felt like a crew of construction workers was operating jackhammers inside my skull. I stumbled to the adjoining bathroom, gripping the doorframe for support, and splashed cold water on my face before choking down to aspirin. 1:20. The second awakening. The headache had intensified, radiating from behind my eyes. Now cold sweats joined the symphony of symptoms, drenching my nightgown and the sheets. I found myself sitting on the cool tile of the bathroom floor, pressing my cheek against the wall, just waiting for another wave of misery to pass. 3:15. This was the worst episode yet. Dry heaving over the toilet bowl while my head felt like it might actually split apart. Every position was uncomfortable. Lying down made my head pound. Sitting up made my stomach churn. Every movement brought a fresh surge of misery. I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed, just staring at the clock, counting the minutes between symptoms, a prisoner in my own home. This isn't normal. The thought became a mantra. This isn't aging. This isn't stress. This isn't overwork. With a shaking hand, I retrieved my home blood pressure monitor from the nightstand drawer. The reading was elevated, not dangerously high, but significantly higher than my usual healthy baseline. My temperature was also slightly above normal, though not quite in fever territory. These were facts, data points in a terrifying equation I couldn't solve. At 4:30. I found myself making mental lists for the doctor I'd be calling first thing in the morning. Symptom onset, late afternoon, duration, ongoing, severity, moderate to severe. I fought the urge to search my symptoms online, knowing the digital rabbit hole of self-diagnosis and terrifying possibilities that awaited. I focused on observable facts, the timeline, the specific sensations, the brutal progression from minor discomfort to significant debilitating illness. Dawn finally arrived at 6, bringing with it a modest improvement. The headache had dulled to a manageable throb, and my stomach felt stable enough for me to move without wanting to double over. I showered with careful, deliberate movements, letting the hot water wash away the misery of the night. Fresh clothes felt like putting on a suit of armor against the continued illness. Toast and weak tea constituted breakfast, bland fuel for whatever challenges the day might bring. I would get through the morning, handle any emergencies, and then I would call the doctor. The drive to Thompson Manufacturing required an exhausting level of concentration. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, taking corners with unusual caution, feeling disconnected from the simple mechanics of operating a vehicle. Vanessa's red sedan was already in the parking lot when I arrived. A knot of unease tightened in my gut. By 9:30, I had managed to review 3 urgent emails and sign 2 contracts. Though a persistent fog clouded my head, I was functioning at perhaps 70% capacity. But I was functioning. I was massaging my temples, trying to clear the haze when a gentle knock sounded at my door. It was Vanessa. "Morning, Mom," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. She strode in, followed by my longtime secretary Helen, who looked unusually flustered. "Mrs. Thompson, I am so sorry," she began, wringing her hands. "Vanessa, Miss Thompson, said you missed the 8:30 logistics call. I tried to remind you yesterday, but I suppose with everything going on." I stared at her, then at my daughter. "The 8:30 call, Helen?" "There was no logistics call on my calendar." Vanessa put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, Helen. Mom's been a bit forgetful lately. The stress is getting to her." She turned to me, her face a perfect mask of concern. "Don't you remember? We discussed it yesterday. The team from Tucson was dialing in." "It's fine. I handled it for you." I looked at my calendar, blank. I trusted Helen implicitly. She had never missed scheduling a meeting in the 20 years she'd worked for me. The idea that both of us had forgotten was ludicrous. Yet Vanessa's confidence, her calm assertion of my forgetfulness in front of my own secretary, was profoundly disorienting. A seed of doubt, poisonous and unwelcome, began to sprout in my mind. "I don't recall that at all," I said, my voice weaker than I intended. "See," Vanessa said softly, giving Helen a knowing look, "she needs to rest. We're all worried about you, Ma." She dismissed her with a nod, and she scurried out, casting a worried glance back at me. The moment she was gone, Vanessa's demeanor changed. She leaned against the doorframe, her expression unreadable. "You look pale, Mom. You really should have stayed home." The words sounded like care, but they felt like a judgment, a confirmation of my supposed decline. She was painting a narrative, and I was the star of it. The aging, forgetful matriarch, no longer fit to lead. An hour later, Vanessa returned. This time, she was carrying another elaborate coffee service, not just cups, but a thermal carafe, assorted pastries, and a small, neatly arranged row of what appeared to be vitamin supplements on the silver tray. She was playing the part of the dutiful, caring daughter to perfection. "You look a bit pale. Everything okay?" she asked, her voice laced with that same theatrical concern. She poured a cup of coffee, the rich, dark aroma, the very same scent that had seemed so comforting yesterday, now hit my stomach like a physical blow. My body recoiled with a surprising, violent intensity, a primal rejection that my conscious mind couldn't yet explain. It was as if my senses were screaming a warning. "Not today, sweetheart," I said, holding up a hand. "I'm still feeling under the weather from yesterday." Vanessa's expression flickered. For a split second, the mask of concern dropped, and I saw it, a flash of raw, undisguised frustration. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by an exaggerated display of solicitude that was almost comical in its intensity. "What kind of symptoms?" she asked, setting the tray down and leaning forward with a show of medical curiosity. "Marcus has nursing experience. You know, he might have some suggestions if you described what you're experiencing." "General malaise," I said, keeping the description intentionally vague. "Headache, nausea, fatigue." I would not give her the satisfaction of knowing the full extent of my suffering. I would not appear weak. Not now. Probably just pushed myself too hard lately. "Or maybe," Vanessa said, her pivot seamless, as if she'd rehearsed this entire conversation, "you need proper nutrition and family support." Her solution was ready before I had even finished stating my problem. The thought was chilling. The rest of the day was a subtle, creeping nightmare. I tried to focus on my work, but the fog in my head made every task a monumental effort. Around noon, I walked down to the engineering department to consult with my lead project manager, a brilliant woman named Carol, who had been with me for 15 years. I found her in her office looking over a set of blueprints, a worried expression on her face. "Evelyn," she said, standing up quickly, "I was just about to come see you. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine, Carol. Just a bit under the weather." "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "It's about the Wilson project. Vanessa was just down here. She told us that due to your health, all major decisions are to be run by her from now on. She said she wanted to lighten your load." The air left my lungs. It was one thing to gaslight me in my own office, but to go behind my back and actively dismantle my authority with my most trusted employees. This was a coup happening in slow motion right under my nose. She said what? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Carol looked at the floor. She made it sound like she was helping, like you'd asked her to step in. She mentioned you'd been forgetting things, that you weren't up to handling the big projects right now. Frankly, Evelyn, it was concerning. Thank you for telling me, Carol, I said, my mind racing. Continue to report to me directly. Is that clear? Of course, Evelyn. Absolutely. The loyalty in her eyes was a small comfort in a sea of betrayal. I walked back to my office, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The confrontation, the apology, the coffee, the illness, the gaslighting, the attempt to seize control. It wasn't a series of disconnected events. It was a strategy, a cold, calculated, and utterly ruthless plan. Vanessa's next move came late in the afternoon. She appeared in my doorway again, her expression now one of gentle, loving concern. She had shed the role of corporate strategist and was now playing the part of the devoted daughter. Marcus is making his famous healing stew tonight, she said, her voice soft. Why don't you join us for dinner? It would do you good to get out of that empty house. She paused, delivering the final calculated blow. Maya's been asking about Grandma all week. The mention of my granddaughter, my 10-year-old Maya, tugged at exactly the right heartstring, and she knew it. I hadn't seen her in 2 weeks, and the girl's boundless energy and unconditional love were a balm to my soul. The thought of her bright smile was the only light in the darkness of the past 2 days. He has these special recipes from his nursing days, Vanessa continued, sensing the emotional leverage was working. Foods that actually help with recovery, not just fill your stomach. She scribbled her address on the back of her business card and slid it across my desk. 7 o'clock. Marcus insists. He says proper family meals can cure more ailments than most medications. My logical mind screamed that the timing was too convenient, an invitation from my suspected tormentor to a healing dinner. But my heart, my grandmother's heart, pictured Maya's face. The misery of my isolation the previous night was a fresh wound. Perhaps the company of my granddaughter, the warmth of a family meal, was exactly what I needed. Suspicion and longing warred within me. The desire to believe in the goodness of my daughter, to see my granddaughter, was a powerful, irrational force. That sounds wonderful, I said, the words feeling like a betrayal of my own instincts. Thank you for thinking of me. Tell Marcus, I appreciate his concern. Vanessa gathered the untouched coffee service, her movements seeming slightly hurried now that she had my agreement. Her smile, however, remained perfectly calibrated. He'll be thrilled, and Maya's been working on a new art project she's dying to show you. I'm looking forward to it, I said, my voice hollowed as she left. I was left holding the invitation, a small white card that felt as heavy as a death sentence. The 30-minute drive to Tempe did little to clear my head. Gratitude and suspicion made for uncomfortable bedfellows, and every red light felt like a chance to turn back, to retreat to the safety of my empty home. But the image of Maya's face propelled me forward. Vanessa's contemporary home sat on a quiet street lined with mature mesquite trees, its well-maintained exterior, a testament to the prosperity Thompson Manufacturing had provided. Before I could even ring the bell, the front door burst open and Maya launched herself from the doorway. Grandma, she wrapped her arms around my waist with a fierce, unadulterated affection that made every sacrifice I'd ever made feel worthwhile. There's my favorite granddaughter, I said, smoothing her braided hair, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in 2 days. The simple, honest joy of her hug was an anchor in the storm of my emotions. The aroma of simmering stew and herbs drifted from the kitchen where I could see Marcus and Vanessa through the open plan layout. They were working in a kind of synchronized efficiency, Marcus stirring something on the stove, while Vanessa arranged place settings with an unusual, almost fussy precision. Come see my new game. Grandma Maya tugged me toward the living room couch, her excitement infectious, momentarily pushing aside my physical weariness and the dark cloud of suspicion. It's about building cities and managing resources. You'll be great at it. We settled onto the comfortable sectional sofa, and Maya began explaining the game's complex rules with the patient enthusiasm of someone who had clearly been looking forward to this moment all day. Her chatter was a welcome distraction, a bubble of innocence that temporarily shielded me from my own dark thoughts. The lingering weakness in my hands and the occasional wave of nausea seemed to recede in the warmth of her presence. Dinner in 20 minutes, Marcus called from the kitchen. His voice carried a forced cheerfulness that sounded slightly strained, like an actor delivering a line he didn't quite believe, making my famous healing stew specifically for Evelyn's recovery. At the mention of dinner, Maya's excitement faltered. She glanced nervously toward the kitchen, then back at the game controller in her hands. A subtle but definite shift occurred in her expression, a flicker of anxiety, of a nervousness I hadn't noticed before. "Everything okay, baby?" I asked gently, studying her face. She'd started fidgeting with the controller's buttons, her fingers moving aimlessly without actually playing the game. Marcus appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel, a bright, practiced smile on his face. "How are you feeling, Evelyn? Any improvement since yesterday?" His concern seemed genuine, yet his eyes were sharp, analytical, evaluating my response rather than simply caring about my welfare. "Better, thank you," I replied, forcing a smile of my own. This family time is exactly what I needed. I looked at Maya, whose continued nervous fidgeting was beginning to alarm me more than my own physical state. "Grandma," Maya said suddenly, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, urgent and low. "I need to tell you something very important." She set down the game controller and turned to face me directly, her young face uncharacteristically serious, etched with a gravity that seemed far too mature for her 10 years. The sudden shift from playful child to solemn informant sent a chill down my spine. "What is it, sweetheart?" I leaned closer, instinctively lowering my own voice to match hers. Maya glanced nervously over her shoulder, toward the kitchen where the sounds of her parents' cheerful preparations continued. She leaned in so close I could feel her breath on my cheek. "I heard them," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I heard my parents talking about putting drops in your food. They said it would make you sick, so you'd have to give them the company." The words came out in a terrified rush, as if she'd been holding them inside for so long. They had finally burst free. The world stopped. The cheerful sounds from the kitchen, the warmth of the living room, the weight of my granddaughter beside me, it all faded into a roaring silence in my ears. Everything I thought I knew, every hope I had foolishly clung to about Vanessa's redemption, about family loyalty, about basic human decency, crumbled to dust in the space between one heartbeat and the next. What exactly did you hear?" I managed to ask, my voice a dry rasp. "Dad was mixing something into a little bottle. Mom said it was a special medicine to make you weak so you couldn't run the business anymore, and she would have to." Maya's small hands were trembling in her lap. "They're trying to hurt you, Grandma." "I don't want them to hurt you." I took her small, shaking hands in mine, feeling their tremor match the seismic earthquake erupting inside me. "You did the right thing, Maya. The bravest thing. Thank you for telling me." I looked into her terrified eyes. "Can you promise me something very important?" She nodded solemnly, her lower lip quivering. "Don't tell your parents we had this conversation. Not a word. Let me handle this, okay? You're safe, and I'm going to make sure we're both protected." I squeezed her hands gently, trying to impart a confidence I was far from feeling. "I just need to use the bathroom for a minute." The guest bathroom provided the sanctuary I desperately needed to process the horrifying reality Maya had just revealed. I locked the door with a deliberate, silent click. My hands were no longer trembling from illness, but from a cold, controlled rage that was terrifying in its intensity. My daughter, my own blood, was attempting to poison me, not just to seize control, but to methodically, cruelly break me down. Perhaps even kill me for a company I had built to secure her future. The monstrosity of it was absolute. I pulled out my cell phone, my fingers moving with a grim purpose. I checked the signal strength, 3 bars, thank God, before dialing 911. Every ordinary sound from the kitchen, which filtered through the door, now felt sinister. Vanessa's humming, the clink of silverware, the opening and closing of cabinet doors, the mundane soundtrack of a family preparing a meal that was meant to be my end. 911. "What is your emergency?" The operator's voice was calm, professional, a lifeline of sanity. "My daughter is trying to poison me," I said, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. Maya's frightened confession had erased any possibility of doubt or misunderstanding. "I'm at her house right now, 1247 Oak Street in Tempe." "Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? They're preparing dinner as we speak." My voice was low but clear. My 10-year-old granddaughter overheard them discussing putting something in my food. "They've been doing this for 2 days. I need officers here immediately." I kept one ear pressed to the door, listening for any approaching footsteps. We're dispatching units to your location now, ma'am. Can you avoid eating or drinking anything they offer you? Yes, I can delay, but please hurry. There's a child here, my granddaughter. She's the one who warned me. The dispatcher's professional questions helped me focus, to organize the crucial details through the fog of my rage, the exact address, the number of people in the house, whether any weapons were present. Units are en route. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes, she said. Ma'am, please remain as calm as possible and avoid any confrontation. Do not let them know you have called the police. After ending the call, I flushed the toilet and ran the water in the sink for a few seconds, maintaining the illusion of normal bathroom usage. My mind was a whirlwind, connecting the dots with horrifying speed. Vanessa's aggressive demand, Marcus's nursing background, the sudden illness after their morning coffee. Every piece now fit perfectly into a monstrous, unbelievable pattern. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes haunted. I forced my expression into a mask of neutral calm. In 15 minutes, my family, as I knew it, would be destroyed, but Maya would be safe. That had to be enough. I opened the bathroom door and stepped back into the hallway. The air outside felt charged, thick with unspoken malice. Each step back towards the living room felt like a mile. I had to project an aura of normalcy, of blissful ignorance, for Maya's sake and for my own. Just as I re-entered the living area, Marcus called out from the dining room, his voice booming with false hospitality. Evelyn, come join us. I have everything ready and it smells incredible. I looked at him. The man calling me to dinner was the same man who had married my daughter, who had held Maya as a newborn and wept with joy, who had called me mom with genuine affection. Now that same man was calculating the dosage required to incapacitate or kill his own mother-in-law. The dissonance was a physical blow. I forced a smile. Coming, I walked toward the dining room with steady, measured steps, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was the performance of a lifetime, and everything depended on my ability to play the part of the unsuspecting guest. I sat down at the table, taking in the scene. Vanessa and Marcus had transformed their dining room into an elaborate dinner theater. Cloth napkins, the good china they usually reserved for holidays, and a centerpiece of fresh desert flowers, all created an atmosphere of warm celebration that made my stomach churn. The guest of honor takes the head of the table, Marcus announced with a theatrical flourish, guiding me to the chair that faced the kitchen, giving them a clear view of me at all times. I watched as Marcus ladled stew into my bowl with particular, focused attention. His movements were precise and deliberate. Then he picked up a small, unmarked container from the counter beside the stove and sprinkled its contents liberally over my stew and my stew alone. I've included some special healing herbs just for you, Evelyn, he explained, his nursing background lending a chilling authority to his words. These particular spices are excellent for digestive issues and general weakness. Maya took her seat across from me. Our eyes met for a brief second before she quickly looked down at her own bowl. The fear in her young face was barely contained. I knew she was watching her parents. Every move with the same horrified fascination that now gripped me. I gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod, trying to convey a reassurance I was far from feeling. I know, I'm handling it. You are safe. To family, healing, and new beginnings, Vanessa said, raising her water glass in a toast. She waited for the rest of us to follow suit. May this meal restore Mom's strength and bring us all closer together. The irony was a physical weight, so heavy it was difficult to breathe. I lifted my own glass, but didn't drink. Setting it back down on the table, I noticed Vanessa's eyes tracking my every movement, a flicker of impatience in her gaze. Marcus placed the stew bowl directly in front of me. The aromatic steam rose from it, carrying the familiar scent of vegetables and spices. But underneath it all, I could now detect something else, a faint, bitter, chemical undertone that my senses, now on high alert, screamed at me to avoid. This looks wonderful, Marcus, but I'm afraid I'm not very hungry tonight, I said politely, pushing the bowl a few inches away from me, still feeling a bit off from yesterday. But you need nourishment to recover properly, Mom. Vanessa's concerned tone was starting to fray at the edges, a slight sharpness creeping into her voice. Marcus spent hours preparing this specifically for your condition. The stew contains nutrients your body desperately needs, Marcus added, his voice smooth but firm. He moved to stand beside my chair, a subtle act of intimidation. Without proper nutrition, your immune system can't possibly fight whatever's been making you so sick. I maintained my polite refusal, a calm, simple, no thank you. Perhaps later. Vanessa's patience was clearly deteriorating. Her jaw tightened, and I caught her exchanging a quick, worried glance with Marcus. Their carefully laid plan was unraveling because their intended victim refused to cooperate. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. Where are they? Mom, you have to eat something, Vanessa insisted. Her voice now carried the same demanding authority she'd used in my office. You've been sick for 2 days. This stew will help. I said no. I repeated, my voice now firmer, colder. I'm not hungry. My response, stripped of all pleasantries, landed like a stone in the tense silence. I saw both Vanessa and Marcus stiffen, their masks of concern finally dropping to reveal the raw frustration beneath. The charade was over at that exact moment. The sound of car doors slamming shut outside broke through our increasingly tense standoff. Heavy, purposeful footsteps crunched on the gravel of the front walkway, followed by a loud, authoritative knock that made everyone at the table freeze. A voice, amplified and clear, shattered the suburban quiet. Police, open the door. Vanessa's face went white, a deathly pallor that seemed to suck all the color from the room. Who called the police? Her question was a panicked accusation, her eyes darting wildly between me and Marcus. Dawning comprehension, finally breaking through her arrogance. Marcus dropped his ladle. It clattered against the hardwood floor with a sharp metallic sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent house. Maya, seizing the moment, slipped from her chair and scrambled to my side, seeking the physical protection I had promised her. The knocking grew more insistent, louder, shaking the entire front door in its frame. This is the Tempe Police Department. We need to speak with the residents immediately. Vanessa Thompson, open this door now. The commanding voice left no room for negotiation or delay. Stumbling like a woman in a dream, Vanessa moved toward the front entrance. She fumbled with the lock, her confident demeanor completely shattered. The moment the door swung open, 3 uniformed officers entered with calm, professional efficiency, their presence instantly changing the dynamic of the room. Their badges gleamed under the warm light of our dining room chandelier. The lead detective, a woman with tired but intelligent eyes, surveyed our bizarre dinner scene. She took in the formal table setting, the steaming bowls of food, and our frozen tableau, the guilty parties, the intended victim, and the terrified child. Her gaze settled on me. Ma'am, we received a report of an attempted poisoning at this address. She addressed me directly while her colleagues moved to strategic positions, securing the room. Are you Evelyn Thompson? I am. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. I stood up slowly, keeping one protective hand on Maya's small shoulder. Thank you for responding so quickly. Vanessa's protests began immediately, a torrent of panicked denials. This is ridiculous. What poisoning? This is a misunderstanding. We're just having a family dinner. Her voice cracked with desperation, but the detective ignored her, instead photographing our table setting before anyone could disturb the evidence. Everyone, please step away from the dinner table, Detective Martinez ordered, her voice calm but absolute. Her partner began carefully collecting samples from each bowl, paying meticulous attention to mine. We'll need to have these contents tested immediately. Marcus stood frozen beside the stove, a statue of disbelief. He watched in horror as a crime scene technician opened his small unmarked herb container and documented its contents with methodical precision. I don't understand what's happening, he whispered, though his trembling hands and ashen face suggested otherwise. Sir, you have the right to remain silent. Detective Martinez approached Marcus, handcuffs at the ready. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Mom, Vanessa's eyes, wide with shock and betrayal, found mine across the room as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. How could you do this? How could you do this to your own family? The staggering hypocrisy of her question left me momentarily speechless. I could ask you the same question, Vanessa, I replied, my voice filled with a sorrow that was deeper than any anger. Marcus's arrest followed within minutes. His nursing background, the very expertise he had used to lend credibility to his healing meals, now made him equally culpable in their cold-blooded scheme. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk outside, their faces illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights that had transformed our quiet, suburban street into a primetime crime scene. Maya pressed closer to me as her parents, now prisoners, were escorted past us toward the front door. Vanessa stopped and turned back, her face a twisted mask of shock and desperate last-minute appeal. "Forgive me, Mom," she pleaded. "I never meant for it to go this far." "You meant to poison me, Vanessa," I said, the words falling like stones in the quiet room. "That's exactly how far you intended it to go." There was no forgiveness in me. Not yet, maybe not ever. The detective assured me that Maya could remain in my custody pending formal arrangements. Within an hour, after giving a preliminary statement, we were driving away from the house that had become a symbol of unimaginable betrayal. The flashing lights receded in the rearview mirror, a final, jarring image of a life that had been torn apart. My granddaughter fell asleep in the passenger seat before we even reached the highway, her small body finally succumbing to the emotional upheaval that had shattered her world. Her peaceful, innocent face was a stark contrast to the ugliness we had just escaped. She was the only thing that mattered now. 20 minutes later, I carried her into my house in Scottsdale. I gently tucked her into the guest bedroom, a room that in the space of a few hours had just become her permanent home. I stood in the doorway watching her sleep, a fierce, protective love welling up inside me. She had saved my life. Now it was my turn to save hers. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, not the oppressive silence of isolation, but the peaceful silence of sanctuary. The court date card in my jacket pocket, given to me by the detective, was a stark reminder of the difficult journey still ahead. This was not the end. It was the beginning of the fight for justice. 8 days later, the Maricopa County Courthouse felt like a cold, imposing cathedral of justice. As Maya and I climbed its massive stone steps, her small hand gripped mine with a tightness that betrayed her anxiety. Her courage, for a girl so young who had endured so much, was nothing short of remarkable. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams." The bailiff's voice boomed through the formal courtroom, and everyone rose in unison. Across the aisle, Vanessa and Marcus sat with their defense attorneys. The sight of them in orange jumpsuits was jarring. They looked diminished, stripped of their arrogance and confidence, crushed by the weight of the overwhelming evidence against them. Marcus stared at his hands in his lap, while Vanessa's gaze darted around the room, finally landing on me with a look of desperation. I met her eyes for a moment, feeling nothing but a profound, hollow sadness. The state of Arizona versus Vanessa Thompson and Marcus Thompson on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree. Judge Williams reviewed the charges with a grave authority before nodding to the prosecutor. "Counselor, you may present your opening statement." The prosecution was methodical, brutal in its efficiency. They presented the lab reports confirming the presence of toxic substances in the stew samples taken from my bowl. They called a medical expert who testified that my symptoms were a classic correlation for the timeline and type of poisoning. They presented the physical evidence from Vanessa's kitchen, the special herbs, painting an undeniable picture of premeditated, cold-blooded murder. Then it was my turn. "Mrs. Thompson, please state your relationship to the defendants." The prosecutor's question was simple, yet the answer was the most difficult I'd ever had to give. "Vanessa is my daughter," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Marcus is my son-in-law." Speaking those words in a court of law felt surreal, as if I were describing characters in a tragedy rather than the people who had shared 30 years of family dinners and birthday celebrations. "Tell the court in your own words what happened on the evening of June 12th. I recounted it all, the dinner invitation, the strange tension, and Maya's terrified whispered warning. My voice broke only once. "If not for the courage of my granddaughter," I said, my gaze sweeping over the silent courtroom, "I would be dead. My own daughter tried to murder me for control of my company." The defense attorney's cross-examination was a pathetic, futile attempt to muddy the waters. "Mrs. Thompson, isn't it possible that you simply misunderstood your granddaughter's innocent observation, that this is all a terrible misunderstanding?" "No," I said firmly. 10-year-old children do not imagine conversations about putting drops in their grandmother's food to make her sick so she'll have to give up her company. Maya's testimony was delivered via closed-circuit television to protect her from the trauma of the open courtroom. With a victim's advocate sitting beside her, she answered the questions with a startling, heartbreaking clarity. "I heard Dad mixing something special for Grandma," she said, her small voice filling the room. "Mom said it would make her too weak to run the company anymore." Her innocent words were the final nail in their coffin. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, but hearing the foreman say the words "guilty" on all counts was still a gut punch. I reached over and squeezed Maya's shoulder, who was watching from a private room with me. Judge Williams's sentencing carried the full weight of moral authority. She looked directly at Vanessa and Marcus, her expression one of cold contempt. Family relationships are supposed to be built on a foundation of trust, love, and protection, she said, her voice ringing with indignation. You violated those sacred bonds for the basest of motives, financial gain. You preyed on the love and trust of your own mother and mother-in-law. You terrorized your own child, forcing her into an impossible position. It is the finding of this court that your actions were not a mistake, but a calculated and cruel conspiracy. One hereby sentence each defendant to 8 years in state prison. A gasp went through the courtroom. Marcus finally broke, burying his face in his hands with a gut-wrenching sob. Vanessa just stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief. As the bailiffs came to lead them away, her final words echoed across the silent room. Mom, forgive me, I lost my way. I watched them being escorted out, my daughter, and the man I had welcomed into my family, disappearing behind a heavy door. Justice had been served, but there was no satisfaction, no triumph, only a vast, empty ache in the place where my family used to be. For days after the trial, I sat in my office at Thompson Manufacturing, the same office where this nightmare had begun. I was reviewing legal documents, but my perspective had been forever changed by the deep scars of family betrayal. The familiar photos on my shelves, the groundbreaking ceremonies, the company picnics, now carried a different, more somber meaning. Success meant nothing if you had no one you could trust to share it with. My estate attorney, a woman I trusted with my life, spread a fresh set of paperwork across the mahogany desk, where Vanessa had once scattered her angry demands. These revisions will ensure that Maya inherits the company in a trust to be managed by a professional board until she turns 25, she explained. Good, I said, my voice firm, and remove Vanessa's name from all corporate documents, every title, every share, every mention. I want her gone. The decision felt both brutally necessary and utterly heartbreaking. It was an amputation, painful, but required to save the rest of the body and establish an educational fund for Maya. I continued, the best schools, the best business training, whatever she wants. But make it clear, there is no pressure for her to join the company unless she freely chooses to. This business will be her opportunity, not her prison. Signing those papers was a final, definitive act. I was not just disinheriting a daughter. I was erasing a betrayal. I was clearing the ground to build something new, something stronger, something worthy of the girl who had shown me the true meaning of loyalty. At 4 o'clock, I drove to Papago Park. The park overlooked the desert landscape, the same view I could see from my office window, but here the view was different. It wasn't a backdrop for corporate battles. It was a peaceful, expansive setting for healing conversations. Maya and I had developed a new evening routine of coming here to watch the sunsets and talk about her adjustment to her new life. We sat on our favorite bench, sharing a comfortable silence as we watched the desert sky transform into brilliant shades of orange and purple. Grandma, Maya asked quietly, her innocent question carrying the weight of a child trying to make sense of an adult's betrayal. Do you think Mom and Dad still love me? I pulled her closer, putting my arm around her shoulders. They love you very much, I said, choosing my words with care. They made some terrible, terrible choices about money and power, choices that hurt a lot of people, but their love for you was never, ever in question. Sometimes people just lose sight of what matters most. We talked for a long time about her new school enrollment, about which friends she wanted to invite for a sleepover, about her gradual, quiet understanding that living with me wasn't a temporary arrangement. Her resilience was a constant source of amazement to me. Her ability to find joy in small things despite everything that had happened was a lesson in itself. Will I run the company someday? She asked, looking up at me, her eyes reflecting the setting sun. Only if you want to, I said, smiling. You will have many choices in your life. Maya and I will support whatever path makes you happy. The sunset painted the desert sky in brilliant strokes of orange and gold as we sat there together on our bench. The most important thing I can ever teach you, I said softly, is that real wealth, the only wealth that matters, comes from relationships that are built on trust and love. Everything else is just noise. Walking back to the car, hand in hand, I felt lighter than I had in years. Justice had been served. The deepest of bonds had been tested and had held strong where they mattered most. The future stretched ahead of us, uncertain, yes, but filled with possibilities I had never imagined. Maya's bright, clear laughter at my suggestion of ice cream for dinner was the most beautiful sound in the world. It was a reminder that some family traditions were worth preserving, while others, broken and poisoned, needed to be left behind so that new, better ones could be created. We had work to do, healing to continue, and a new kind of family legacy to build together. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.